Hello everyone, my name is Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video I'm going to be talking about International Rugby League, more specifically England, and opportunities that we could take possibly next year, given that we won't be playing against Tonga and no longer going to be playing against Samoa. Now I understand that this video is about 2, maybe even 3 weeks late at this point, but I do need to make some content for this channel because otherwise I'm going to lose all my subscribers, so here it is. So the news that came out a few weeks ago after the 3-match test series against Tonga was that Samoa would no longer be competing against us next year in a test series. Now, there are a few things that I want to cover and a couple suggestions that I have in mind personally, but I do think that there are some viable opportunities. One is a lot more financially doable than the other, and I think still offers a real unique challenge and something that's actually decent for England going forwards for International Rugby League. So the first thing, probably the lowest thing that people are supporting, is probably a War of the Roses. Lancashire versus Yorkshire. For me, I have no interest in it. I'm from Cheshire anyway, so that's a personal bias, but some people have suggested it, but it's not something that is widely supported right now. I'd be more in favour of a North versus South before a War of the Roses, if I'm honest. But there are two suggestions that I have in mind that I personally think are either interesting or helpful for England. Now, the one that I think is helpful for England, I think is actually the most viable, is a 3-match test series against All-Stars. Now, the difference that I'd have is I wouldn't have it in the middle of the season. I hate international breaks in football. I don't want to see it in rugby. I'd be okay with a 3-match test series against an All-Star team. So Shaun Wane would pick his set-in-stone England team. There would be no changes. And then the All-Stars team would have 3 different iterations. Now, I'd also be okay with one squad that is used for all 3 matches. But I kind of like the idea of a plethora of players being selected for the All-Stars. So there'd be an entirely new group of 17 for match 1, an entirely new group of 17 for match 2, and the same for match 3. And that at least adds a little bit of spice to the event, let's say. You know, you get to see players that might be left out of the England team, and the best example that I could give, written his name down here, is Mikey Lewis. Now, it's very possible that Shaun Wane would pick George Williams and Harry Smith as his 6 and 7. It makes complete sense, but a lot of people, really liked what Mikey Lewis did against Tonga. Now, what Shaun Wane might try to do, or be encouraging in the All-Star selection, is that Mikey Lewis gets selected for the whole series or for one of the games to try and work his way into the squad to push George Williams or even Harry Smith out of that 6 or 7 position. And that's something that would be very interesting. And there's certain players where, it depends who Shaun Wane wants to play at centre, but let's say Toby King was left out, or even Jake Wardle, they play in the All-Stars. So there are potential England selections that play for the All-Stars that kind of put one against Shaun Wane and say, well, this is why you should have really picked me, or here's a reason to pick me in the future. So that's something that's really interesting to me personally. Some people think that the All-Stars England game is a waste of time. I am not a huge fan of it, but if it's a series at the end of the season, as we had against Tonga, but the venues are spread around the country, I would personally be all for it. I think that's a viable option that is enjoyable enough. I'm personally, as I said, okay with 3 different iterations of teams for the All-Stars, or just one squad that goes throughout the whole series. But I think the former is a little bit more interesting. So we would see a huge mix of players, a huge range of players from all different Super League clubs. I would say even include Championship clubs in there if you wanted to. Players from Championship clubs. But I think England versus Exiles or All-Stars in a 3-match series after the season's done, not mid-season, is genuinely a viable option. Now, the second option that I personally prefer, and I understand it is going to be a lot more financially difficult, the way that it's more of a structured argument that I'm about to put forward here, rather than just say, oh, let's just do this. There's actual points to go through. Now, I think that a Six Nations Rugby League competition could be really helpful. One thing that I think we need to remember as fans, as Rugby League fans in England, is Australia aren't bothered about us. New Zealand aren't bothered about us. The rest of the Pacific Island nations aren't bothered about us right now. They're doing their own thing, and good for them. I'm enjoying the kind of rugby that they're producing. But I think people forget that even though it's kind of the Super League clubs that have the fan bases, really, the sustainable fan bases, we do have a decent amount of clout that we can try and spread to Scotland, to Wales, to Ireland, and, kind of create a snowball effect where we bring in the numbers to events and it gets people from those countries interested a little bit more. So I think a Six Nations competition that includes, of course, England, but we invite Scotland, Wales, Ireland, France, and Lebanon. Now, I completely understand that in that Six Nations format, England are clear favourites, and bar maybe one team making it close, maybe if England's having an off day, England would probably walk it. But unfortunately, there's no one else available. The Pacific Island nations, as I said, are doing their own thing. They don't care about us. So let's focus on us finding the next best teams available and trying to grow the game in areas just around England and see if we can create a snowball effect. So the way that I would structure a Six Nations tournament personally is I would have it at 6 different venues. Now, each team would play each other team once, and then I'd have the top 2 playing at a final. So there'll be 6 venues, but 5 of them spread around the country, played as a magic round, basically. So it's back-to-back-to-back games. I would structure it in a way that allows England to play against certain nations at specific locations, as that is going to be the premier game. Anyone versus England is the game of the tournament for that nation. So I'm going to give you a breakdown now. It's fairly easy to go through, but I'll just try and keep it as concise as possible. So the way that this would be structured is that England would play a nation in the most convenient place possible, but the venues would be spread all across the country. So there'd be one in the absolute north of England. I think you can guess which city I'm talking about. There's one in the Heartlands, one in the Heartlands to the west, one in the Midlands, and one down south. So in terms of how I would structure a Six Nations tournament, yes, it would benefit England, but it's to get these countries on the outside that don't really have the same rugby league following as England does, to make it as convenient as possible. So this is how I'd structure it. For me, round 1 would be in Newcastle. England would play against Scotland. Very self-explanatory. I don't think I really need to go into detail on that one. Round 2, we go to Leeds. And I'll get into something about the Tongan series in a moment, but Leeds would host round 2 and England would play against Lebanon. I think that's the most throwaway matchup that England could have, just based on location. I'll get to that in a moment as well. A lot of people complained about the third match of the Tongan series being in Leeds and how it possibly should have been a sellout. I would argue that at that point, the series was at its least meaningful, if that makes sense. The series itself was wrapped up. England had already won it. I would argue that if the first game of the series was at Leeds, there's a very good chance it would have sold out. Leeds Rhinos fans in particular, they have the highest attendance of all Super League teams, I believe. So in Leeds, I think it'd be completely fine. And in this format, for a Magic Round style event, I think it's possible we could still sell out in Leeds, if it's round based anyway. So round 2 in Leeds against Lebanon. Moving on to round 3, that would be in Bolton for me. So still within the general Super League club area, but to the west. So it sort of is leaning more towards Wire fans, Saints fans, Wigan, Lee, Salford, etc. So, and that would be against Ireland. I think it's easy enough, or would be easy enough for Irish fans to fly to Manchester and then just get a taxi or whatever trains they can get to Bolton, or ferries to Liverpool. I believe there are ferries that go to Liverpool, and then a train from Liverpool Lime Street to Manchester Oxford Road or Manchester Piccadilly. It's easy enough to do. It takes about an hour, roughly, give or take. But it's completely easy enough. So round 3 would be in Bolton against Ireland. Moving on to the Midlands next in Sheffield, which would be against Wales. England versus Wales. For me, that's just makes the most sense based on how it's been structured so far. If you just take Wales and shift it across, it covers a solid proportion of the Midlands anyway. It's not the worst drive in the world if you're in Cardiff. Everything's going to be a difficult drive if you're in Cardiff, but Wales, I think, makes the most sense for Sheffield or even other places in the Midlands. But round 5 in London against France. French fans can get flights to Heathrow, to Gatwick, maybe Stansted. It's not as accessible, but is easy enough to do. Then what I would probably do is establish a new, let's call it, home final stadium, which would be the Etihad. I think after all 5 rounds have been played, the top 2 play in a final at the Etihad Stadium, which should be, in my personal opinion, the new final home of English Rugby League. Plus Catalans and Toulouse for Super League purposes, because I think that Old Trafford should be gone and the Etihad comes in for the grand final. So for me, that's how I'd personally structure a Six Nations Rugby League competition. It is benefiting England based on trying to get, the best attendance possible, but that's what we should be doing. And I think, if you look at the kind of players that we can include in this, so there's just a few. So for Scotland, you've got Ryan Brierley right off the bat, or even Matty Russell. You look at Wales, it includes Rhys Williams. Bailey Antrobus was someone that I believe he plays for York. I don't really watch the Championship personally, but he really impressed me at the World Cup last year. So I'd be excited to see him again. For Ireland, you've got the senior brothers. You've got George King, Richie Myler. I'm not sure if he retired from international or not. I do apologise if he did. Ed Chamberlain. Maybe Toby King and or Robbie Mulhern if they decided to actually shift back to Ireland for that and they weren't selected for England. I hate the fact that people can just move as freely as they do, but they might do that, so they are also included. You're looking at Lebanon, you've got Abbas Miski, Jacob Kiraz, Khalid Rajab. Khalid Rajab was someone I really enjoyed watching. I think he wasn't talked about enough. For France, Arthur Morg, Theo Farge, Benjamin Garcia, just to name a few. And then, in terms of other NRL players, Jamin Jolliffe, I didn't even mention him for Ireland, but the 2 biggest players that you could have that would hopefully draw in a lot more fans as well, Luke Keary for Ireland and Mitchell Moses for Lebanon. If you get those people over, that would be incredible. And again, I understand, given the situations with some of the players not getting flights, or at least limited help with flights from the RFL or whoever it was, it might be a bit of a tall order, but there's a good handful of NRL players that could be included in a Six Nations test. And then you look at the kind of players that England can have, like I've written down a potential backline that England could have, which would be Jack Wellesby, Dominic Young, Harry Newman, Herbie Farnworth, Matty Ashton, George Williams, Harry Smith. It would dominate. I think it'd be good enough to compete against Australia and New Zealand personally. Definitely would wipe the floor with Tonga at this point and would compete easily with Samoa. But there is a huge list of Super League players and a good handful of NRL players and 2 top NRL players that could compete in a Six Nations tournament. Now, as I was saying before as well, England would wipe the floor with everyone, I think, but the kind of matches that France could have against Lebanon, Lebanon against Ireland, and then Ireland against France, those 3 in a rotation, they'd produce some incredible matches, truly incredible matches. You'd have Wales, when they play Scotland, would be a close affair, but they'd both be sitting near the bottom of the ladder, I'm pretty sure. But I think it would just be about producing the best rugby league possible even if it's not just England, getting fans from Scotland, Ireland, Wales, France, maybe even Lebanon, to just witness more rugby league would just be the best thing possible, and spread the games all throughout England. So they are the two main suggestions that I have. England versus the Exiles, or All-Stars in a 3-match test series, or a Six Nations tournament where the matches are spread out and it's like a Magic Round format. I don't really know what else we could do. There aren't really any other nations that are out there that we could compete against. We could try to tempt one of the Pacific Island nations, but I don't really think there's much else we can do. They're doing their own thing, as I said. Let's just try and improve our neck of the woods in terms of rugby league attendance and awareness. And hopefully, what I would hope is that with every game, every Super League game being on Sky, if something like this was announced early, Abbas Miski is likely to score a lot of tries next season. We could reference him being a Lebanese player, and then that sort of ties into talking about a Six Nations competition. So when new fans stumble across it, they are now made aware of a Six Nations competition. If a Scottish person stumbles across it, they hear about Six Nations, they hear Scotland's competing. Oh, I might actually watch it because Scotland is competing in a Rugby League Six Nations. Things like that. And that will spread across Wales as well. More of Scotland, a lot more of England. So I think that would be the most interesting option, but I do think the All-Star idea is also very viable and probably easier to do. But if you guys have any other suggestions for International Rugby League, more specifically the English side of the game, do let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts. But that is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.